First of all, I would like to thank Professor Shiladji, Professor Nagy, and Dr. Zombori for their kind invitation to join this year's research group. My link with this year's topic is mostly through the state aid aspect of this topic, but today in my presentation I will cover all the four aspects we had to analyze this year. So I will mention some of the aspects of Serbian legal system in which we fully follow the EU model or in which we differ from the EU model. As you are all aware of, given that you come from countries that were previously in the similar position as Serbia is today, our European integration process is governed by the Stabilization and Association Agreement signed with the European Union, which is actually modeled upon Europe Agreement signed by the Central and Eastern European countries. We have signed the Stabilization and Association Agreement in 2008, and since 2012, Serbia has an EU candidate status. The relevant provisions of the Stabilization and Association Agreement relevant for our today's topic are these two articles you see on the slide. Article 89, which requires Serbia to establish a functioning market economy and to gradually approximate its policy to the stability-oriented policies of the European Economic and Monetary Union. And Article 100, where the parties agreed to establish cooperation in the field of taxation, including the measures aiming at the further reform of Serbia's fiscal system and the restructuring of tax administration. So the first subtopic I would like to cover today is the public finance. The budgetary procedure is regulated under the Budget System Act, and there are some budgetary constraints prescribed under this act. So under the general fiscal rules, the governance sector debt, including the liabilities based on restitution, should not exceed 60% of the GDP, while the target medium-term fiscal deficit should represent 0.5 of the GDP. So if the government sector debt exceeds or is predicted to exceed 55% of the GDP, then the government is obliged to submit to the National Assembly, together with the budget for the following year in the fiscal strategy, as well as in the revised fiscal strategy, a program for government sector debt reduction, and the report on the implementation of the debt reduction program, and the updated program for each subsequent year in which such debt remains above 55% of the GDP. The general government debt to GDP ratio had fallen from a peak of over 70% in 2015 to 55.10% in 2022. Of course, there is some flexibility in the rules. So in the event of natural disasters and external shocks that may endanger human health, national security, and provoke a significant decline of economic activity, the government may temporarily deviate from the fiscal principles and rules, and the decision to deviate from fiscal principle and rules must be submitted to the National Assembly, but only for informational purposes. We have established the Fiscal Council as well. We heard that this is something which this type of institution exists in other Central European countries. So the tasks of the Fiscal Council is to prepare an opinion on the draft fiscal strategy, to prepare and submit to the National Assembly an analysis of revised fiscal strategy, to prepare and submit to the National Assembly the estimates of fiscal impact of other laws and amendments that were submitted during the Assembly debate. However, there are no consequences for the government for not following the Council's recommendations. So, for example, if any of the recommendations of the Fiscal Council has not been included in the fiscal strategy, this simply needs to be stated, and the reasons for such decision must be provided. So, If the government is not following the opinion, it must justify the refusal to follow the opinion, and both the opinion, the full integral version of the opinion of the Fiscal Council will be published, as well as the response of the government on why not following the advice given by the Fiscal Council. So if we adopt this distinction between different types of Fiscal Council in three categories, very soft, soft, and hard ones. The Serbian one would be soft, meaning that the government does not have to follow the advice, but the opinions are always made public. These are not internal opinions. Also, the Fiscal Council may request information from any other state authority. However, if some state authority refuses to provide information to the Fiscal Council can only notify the National Assembly of that lack of cooperation. Now my favorite part, the state aid. Regarding state aid, I would like to emphasize that Serbian rules are generally in line with EU law. We have adopted our first state aid law in 2009 and established a state aid commission. This state aid commission was modeled pretty much like those existed in Central and Eastern Europe before joining the European Union. So it was, formally speaking, part of the Ministry of Finance, but it was independent from the Ministry of Finance. However, this concept was criticized by the European Union, although it existed in a similar manner in most Central and Eastern European countries. So the Serbian government decided to propose, and the parliament adopted, a new law on state aid control in 2019. The Commission for State Aid Control is now modeled in a very similar way as the Commission for Protection of Competition. So the members are appointed by the Parliament. So it is now a fully independent authority with no links whatsoever with the government. Serbia, under the Stabilization and Association Agreement under Article 73, was required to compile a comprehensive list of state aid schemes and to align them with state aid rules by the 1st of September 2017. We have not done that. So this was one of the rules, one of the reasons why the accession negotiations in this chapter were delayed. Last year, in March 2022, the Commission for State Aid Control issued a notice on the obligation and manner of alignment of state aid schemes with within the competence of the Ministry of Finance. So we have now fulfilled this requirement under the under the Stabilization and Association Agreement. And the following fiscal schemes are designed as incompatible. There are 4 schemes under the corporate income tax, tax exemption for concession grantors, tax holiday for large investments, tax exemption for employment of persons with disability, and tax credit for risk investment. Then the wage tax refund under the Personal Income Tax Act, the refund of Social Security contributions under the Mandatory Social Security Contributions Act, and the exemption from tax and other duties under the Free Zones Act. So in this notice, which is a bylaw, the State Aid Commission said that these state aid schemes must be assessed in the context of a particular category of state aid to which they belong, which is either horizontal or sector-specific aid. Some may be granted as de minimis aid if they meet the criteria for de minimis aid, and some of them may also be abolished by the government if the government decides to do so. What is missing still in this state aid area is the regional aid map, which is not yet adopted. And until this regional aid map is drawn up, the entire territory of the Republic of Serbia is being considered as an area with a GDP per capita of less than or equal to 45% of the EU average. In the area of taxation, we were required to check the double taxation treaties from the perspective of the non-discrimination principle. So in Serbian tax law theory, there is a distinction between three types of double taxation treaties according to the manner in which the non-discrimination principle is formulated. There are those which do not contain this prohibition of discrimination clause at all, but they are a minority. There are those which follow the OECD Model Tax Convention, and those who are where the prohibition is not based on residence but on nationality. These are also older treaties. So, to be honest, most of them follow the OECD Model Tax Convention. What is seen as a problem is that sometimes they follow the OECD Model Tax Convention in the English version, but in the Serbian version the translation is not always the same, so it is not uniform, and sometimes the Serbian word which is chosen is not the best translation of the English word. The other issue we were required to check was the abuse of law principle in tax law. So in Serbian tax law, we do not have explicitly the abuse of law principle. We have something similar, which is called the facticity principle. This facticity principle is typically mentioned in the end of opinions issued by the Ministry of Finance. However, usually there is no visible link between the mentioning of the principle and the contents of the opinion. It has become kind of a model of these decisions. The Serbian tax law theory explains this constant reference to this principle in the opinions of the Ministry of Finance by saying that this is an abstract reference. So the only purpose is to remind the tax authority that it is solely responsible to solve an individual tax affair, and that it cannot transfer the responsibility to the Department for Fiscal System within the Ministry of Finance. And finally, the monetary policy subtopic we were covering within our research is based on two different issues. I will cover today only the first one, so I will not deal with the reaction to the COVID-19 crisis or to the reaction of the energy crisis. I have dealt with that in the paper, but today I would like to mention this dinarization policy. So this is actually the attempt of the National Bank and of the government to increase the use of the national currency in commercial transactions, given that euro is typically used as a reference currency even in everyday speech. There was a research undertaken by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in 2010, and that research showed that Serbia was one of the most Euroized economies, so economies that most refer to euro in Eastern Europe. So following that, in 2012 and again in 2018, there was a memorandum signed between the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance to a memorandum on dinarization. There are three pillars of this dinarization process. The first one is the strengthening of the macroeconomic environment characterized by low and stable inflation, stable financial system, and sustainable economic growth. The second pillar is the promotion of dinar in instruments and markets, with special emphasis on the development of dinar securities market. And the third pillar is the development and improvement of FX hedging instruments in the non-banking sector. So there are measures which were undertaken by the central bank, but there were also measures which were undertaken by the government. For instance, the government adopted a program for subsidizing interest rates exclusively on dinar corporate loans with a maximum repayment term for 18 months. There is also a transparency aspect of this dinerization activity, because the central bank publishes the quarterly report on dinerization of the Serbian fiscal system. You can find it on the website of the central bank. So in the latest report corresponding to the first quarter of 2023, the central bank indicated that the share of dinar in total corporate and household deposits increased in the first quarter of this year to a record high. And observing only new deposits in the first quarter of this year, this share dropped. So to conclude, as you have probably realized during my today's presentation, Serbia is largely aligned with the EU model in this area. However, the fact that we are not a member state but a candidate state with quite a, to be frank, quite a vague perspective of joining the European Union, this gives us some time to not to react immediately, but to wait for a year, 2 or 3, and perhaps to learn from some mistakes made by by the member states. Thank you for your attention.